All right. Thank you so much for coming in this weather, and it's really great to see all of you. I prepared kind of ambitious presentation, so we have a lot to cover, but it's a very interesting topic, and I hope you will, have a lot of questions afterwards, so we will have time for discussion in the end. So what I thought to talk about today is a short historical background. Start with a short historical background of the Hungarian Holocaust. Then we will move on to talk about the monument of the German occupation, which was erected in 2014. Then we're going to talk about the Living Memorial Civil Group and the counter monument that they installed in front of that monument. We will very shortly just talk about the memory of the Holocaust after 1945, and then I'm going to give you one explanation of why and how this monument and this conflict could be understood from the perspective of social psychology through the concept of competitive victimhood, which comes actually from Israeli researchers, very interesting theory, and related to that concept, research also has some suggestions of how to resolve similar conflicts, and you will, I think, find this interesting in terms of maybe American memory, debates about American memory and history as well. And then you will have time for comments and questions. I'm not sure how detailed I should go into this. How many of you, know the story of the Hungarian Holocaust? But I need to mention a few facts. So first of all, what you see there used to be the Austro-Hungarian Empire that ceased to exist after the First World War, and after that, Hungary, the Hungarian kingdom, is basically the territory that used to be the Hungarian kingdom is divided among 5 countries, Hungary and the neighboring countries. And the depiction of it, what you see here already gives you an idea how this was understood by the Hungarians as a huge trauma. So basically, what you see over there in the central area is what Hungary today, which is the Trianon borders. And in the north, that area was given to Slovakia. Basically, Slovakia was created, and Romania in the south, Croatia, Serbia. So this is very important to understand the interwar politics, which were basically geared towards revise this decision, which Hungary and the Hungarians felt to be unjust. Because there were Hungarians who remained on those territories, and of course because Hungary was before a much larger territory. So,
can you point to which location was what area?
Yes. So this is Hungary. This is what remained Hungary. So basically, how they decided was on this territory. This is what used to be the Hungarian kingdom. There were different ethnicities who lived, not only Hungarians. So when they made the Trianon borders, this was the area where most Hungarians lived. But of course, there were here as well and here as well. So they just drew the borders according to maybe a little, according to the decision then. So this is what remained Hungary. This is what was given to Slovakia, Romania, this is Croatia, Serbia. So this Trianon Treaty is very important, but also it's important to talk about anti-Semitism during the interwar years, which is kind of going along with these revisionist ideas. But basically, you see here Horthy, Admiral Horthy, who was the governor of Hungary in these times, so from 1919 until 1944, who very early on allies with Hitler with the hope of regaining those territories. So Hungary is the first in Europe to pass an anti-Jewish law, or as early as 1920, which is the numerus clausus, which limited the number of Jews who could study at universities. And then later on, this is followed by other anti-Jewish laws. In 1938, the first anti-Jewish law, and then 1939, the second anti-Jewish law, which both limited Jews' participation in the economic sectors, professions, high schools, public sector, or to hold influential positions in theaters and newspapers. And then finally, Hungary joins the Second World War on the side of Nazi Germany in 1941. And that's when the third anti-Jewish law is passed, which forbids marriage between Jews and non-Jews, but it also, it's different from the other laws because it defines Jews on the racial basis. And then from this time on, Hungarian Jewish men are drafted to forced labor, which you could say already is the first institution of the Hungarian Holocaust. But what historians usually consider as a direct first step of the Hungarian Holocaust is the Kamenets-Podolsk, the massacre in Kamenets-Podolsk, which happened in 1941. Kamenets-Podolsk is in today's Ukraine, and there were 23,000 Jews expelled from Hungary in 1941 who were so-called stateless Jews. These Jews fled to Hungary before. Some of them lived in Hungary for 5 or 10 years, spoke perfect Hungarian, but they didn't have Hungarian citizenship. So when Hungary was asked to give out these Jews, it gave out them as stateless citizens, and that's many historians consider that as the first part of the beginning of the Hungarian Holocaust. And then we don't have too much time to go into the details, but it's important to note that Hungary wanted to leave the alliance with Hitler as the war was advancing, and Hungary saw that Germany was losing. So one thing Hungarians knew they didn't want to be on the loser side again. But the Germans got to know about this plan of leaving the alliance, and that's why Germany occupied Hungary in order to prevent this jump out. Yes. They are killed. All of them are killed in the Ukraine, in Kamenets-Podolsk, by the Einsatzgruppen. So it's not in concentration camps. They are gunned down. They're basically gunned down there, all of them. There are people, very few people who could escape. So after the German occupation, Hungary starts as late as 1944, April and May, to organize Jews in ghettos, and in May to deport them to concentration camps. And again, we don't have now the opportunity to go into more detail. What happened in Budapest was a little different because Budapest Jews were eventually not deported, but everyone else from the countryside were deported. And by the end of the war, there were 600,000 Jews from the larger territory of Hungary who were killed in the Holocaust. So in 2014 was the 70th anniversary of the Hungarian Holocaust, and the Hungarian government, which is the current government, the same one, with Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, and the Fidesz government, announced that there is going to be a Holocaust memorial year the next year, and they announced a few symbolic projects that they're gonna do. One was a monument for the German occupation. The second one was establishment of a historic research institute, the Veritas, which means truth in Latin, of course. The third one was the creation of the House of Faith's Holocaust Museum, even though Hungary already had a Holocaust museum at that point, but the government decided to make a new one. And the fourth one was to allocate 1 billion forint for Holocaust memory projects for NGOs. Now, we will not talk about these other three, but I wanted you to understand that this monument is just like one piece of a larger intention to solidify one narrative, one specific narrative of the Holocaust in Hungary, and to pursue one memory of the Holocaust. So already when this was announced that this is the monument of the German occupation as it is today, when this was announced in the very end of 2013, in the beginning of January, there were drawings that came out, and those drawings already, you could see that this is going to look like this. So people started to make questions. I don't know how this looks to you. Now I want to ask your opinion, or what do you see on this monument, or who has seen this monument before, maybe in person? I think none of you? Okay. So what do you see? Eagle? A cross? An angel, very good. So in the center, what you see is Archangel Gabriel, who is the patron saint of Hungary, and he's holding an orb in his hand, which has this double cross, and that orb and with the double cross is the symbol of Hungary in for thousands of years. So that's basically, you could understand that as Hungary, that is attacked by a German, an eagle, which in this context is could be interpreted, it should be interpreted, is interpreted as Nazi Germany, and it has a number on its feet, and it says 1944, that number, and in the center there is a Hungarian text that says the memorial for the victims of the German occupation. Now, this monument is placed at Freedom Square, and here you see this round shape. That's actually the place of another monument, which is the monument that the Soviets put there to commemorate the liberation of Budapest by the Soviet army. Now, this monument, this new monument of the German occupation now is placed just opposite to that. On the other photo, you can see the same. So there is that column in the back. That's the Soviet Liberation Monument, and in the front, you see this other monument, the German Occupation Monument. So this already gives you a little idea of what the government was trying to say with this monument, or why it was important to remember the German occupation in the Holocaust Memorial Year. So basically, when the plans came out, people started to criticize the plan because why? Because how can you represent Hungary as an angel? Angels, as we know, they are innocent. When Hungary was actively allying with Germany and actively participated in the deportation and killing of 600,000 citizens, Hungarian citizens. So Randolph Braham, who you probably know, he just passed away recently, was the most important historian, American historian of the Hungarian Holocaust, until the German embassy, the Israeli embassy, the Yad Vashem, everyone was protesting against this memorial, including the Alliance of the Hungarian Jewish Communities, who started to, this is very new because usually they don't go against the government, but this is a very, obviously very critical issue. So this is when Prime Minister Viktor Orbán asked the community to put the debate on hold until the elections, which was upcoming on the 6th of April, and said, we understand there is a controversy about this, there is a debate about this, but let's wait until the elections and then we will come back to this. Now, on the 8th of April, the construction of the monument begins with no debate, discussion, negotiation whatsoever. Civil mobilization that was already starting before, obviously after this promise was not kept, is becoming a little more active. So people go out to the square to protest. And in spite of those protests, on the 20th of July, 2014, the government evacuates the square and just places the monument with the help of the police. There is no inauguration ceremony. It was just placed there, and it's still there. Now here you see some photos of the protest and how the protesters were, looking in the eyes of the police, and they tried to prevent the construction. This, again, already leads to our next point, the Living Memorial Group. You see the two chairs, so they were already there representing this, and in front of it you see stones and candles, because this group, as it was started on the Facebook, it started with saying that people should bring an object, a personal object or a stone to represent their own memory of the Holocaust, and start a debate or a discussion about how the Holocaust or how the German occupation should be represented. We already talked about what the problems was. So basically depicting Hungary as a victim, that there was no agreement, so that by remembering the occupation shifts the responsibility for the Holocaust from Hungary to the Germans. The location of the monument also emphasizes a loss of autonomy. So Hungary was basically a victim. It was occupied. What could Hungary do? And it's important to note that there is no central Holocaust memorial in Budapest or in Hungary. So if there would be one, like there is one in Berlin, maybe you could think, okay, you can make one monument for the German occupation, even though it's not very customary to make monuments for occupation. Usually we want to make monuments for victims, or for people who saved Jews. But to commemorate the occupation, even though they put the victim there, it's kind of problematic. So here, again, you see the police and guarding the monument. And here, just one last thing as a criticism of the monument itself. I don't know how many of you can read Hebrew, but if you look at just the Hebrew text, the text, it's messed up, basically because they put the first line, the second line. So hakurbanot, it's the first word, which is like an old word actually for the Holocaust. It's the same word as the Holocaust in Hebrew, kurban. It's a burning sacrifice. And then lezechrem shel, which should be in Hebrew, coming before. So anyway, this is just, just to give you an idea about the monument's cursed nature. So the Living Memorial Group, I guess this is where I wanted to show you the video. And I'm going to have to... Yes, I'm going to show you the video of the Living Memorial Group's protest. So here you can see people coming and preparing for the flash mob. This was before the monument was there. And they placed the two chairs there. So it's really strange because the monument is placed in front of a garage that's like an underground garage, which is in the back of it. And basically what the group is doing, and the way how they were able to keep this counter monument there, that they are saying that this is an act of memory of the victims as well, placing the candles and placing these objects. So this is how the group started, and after that, the group remained very active. So people are placing photos. Maybe there some people are their own personal photos. Some they would. I've seen, for instance, photo of Horthy and Hitler together, the one that I've shown you, or some. Or people are putting their documents that show that their relatives or themselves, they were in the Holocaust. Okay. So here you can see the monument already when it was placed there. There is a fountain in front of it, and as I said, the Living Memorial Group did not just. First, there were those iron bars, and then later on, those iron bars were removed, and the police presence was removed as well. But the group was able to keep these objects. So you see the two chairs in the center, and those photos, and not only these objects remained there, but the group remained active. They had a tent at this square where there have been continuous programs ongoing related to the Holocaust, but not only, also related to history during the communism, but basically all topics that they introduced were topics that are relevant topics in civil society today that the group thinks that should be discussed. This is another photo, and here you can see that the car is going, and I think it's another very strange decision to place a monument, which is in the back, a place where you can't go in front of it because there is a way for the cars. So I find that also like very disrespectful. Now, very quickly. This all, of course, fits into the memory of the Holocaust in Hungary writ large, and this is the Soviet monument that I told you about. So that's opposite the monument. What we can say that after 1945, there were immediate accounts of the Holocaust in Hungary. Books were published, but it's true that from 1948, the start of the communist regime. There was one certain type of how the Holocaust was talked or not talked about. Basically, the Holocaust was not a word that was used. It wasn't used not only in Hungary, but also in the entire world. It started to be used after the American miniseries on TV, which was as late as 1978. But it was the Second World War, and there were, the fascists and the anti-fascists, who were the communists, and the Second World War was seen in these two narratives. So this probably has a lot to do also why today the memory of the Holocaust is so difficult to face in Hungary. There was no public discussion about the Holocaust like in Western Germany, where in 1968, the children of people who were in the war started to ask questions, what did you do? In Hungary, those discussions were not taking place. And there were monuments, for instance, for the ghetto as well in Budapest, but on those monuments, Jews were not mentioned. It was victims of fascism, and you can still see them. So you can see how you can kind of slide from victims of fascism. Of course, everybody was in Hungary a victim of fascism because everybody had to go through the war. So this victimization narrative was already there during the communist time, but what happened later is something even more. So after '89, while Hungary joins the European Union, there is the opportunity now to talk in a different way also about the Holocaust, and joining the European Union and joining Europe was one main precondition, was to accept the memory of the Holocaust. The Holocaust Remembrance Day is introduced, and the Holocaust Documentation Center opens in 2005. This is the center. And basically, Hungary aligns with the global memory of the Holocaust. And this is an expression that Monika Kovács uses in a recent article. So basically what she's saying, that there is a global memory of the Holocaust, which you all know, which most of people know, that this was maybe the biggest crime against humanity, and it shouldn't happen again. And Hungary introduces that narrative in the education system and in the public square and public speech. Yet, at the same time, there is a parallel local memory of the Holocaust that emerges that denies Hungary's responsibility. So one example of it, it's the House of Terror, which was opened in 2002 when Fidesz was in power. The same government was in power before. So what you see over there is the fine-pointed star symbolizing the communist oppression, and next to it the arrow cross, which was the symbol of the Hungarian Nazis. And it's a museum that's on a place where both totalitarian systems had their offices and people were tortured. Yet, if you go into the museum, there are 3 floors about the communists, and there is 1 room about the Holocaust. At the same time, you can see how these 2 things are already here, leveled next to each other. Well, between 2002 and 10, there are socialist governments, not so much happens in terms of the memory of the Holocaust, but when Fidesz again gets in power in 2010, there are further steps that are taken to strengthen this local memory of the Holocaust. So the fundamental law of Hungary, which is basically Hungary's constitution, again, expresses the same idea. Hungary lost its independence. So we date the restoration of our country's self-determination lost on the 19th day of March 1944, from the 2nd day of May 1990, when the first freely elected organ of popular representation was formed. We shall consider this date to be the beginning of our country's new democracy and constitutional order. So basically, again, you have this same, we lost autonomy, we were victims, we were occupied, oppressed. Now, I promise you to bring you a concept that make you understand what happens here. There are Israeli researchers who studied conflicts, violent conflicts, and how different groups react after these conflicts. And basically, what they say is that after these conflicts happen, the different groups have psychological motivation to restore the in-group's moral image and also to restore the sense of power. So what does it mean? So all of us want to belong to groups where we think our group is good. We don't want to belong to a group that did bad things. So because of that, if you look at the nation as a group, it's a real problem. How are we going to integrate the story of killing 600,000 people? So because of those, and this is just an example in Hungary, but you can look at other conflicts. Obviously, the Israelis probably looking more at their own conflicts. So there is an individual level strategies to cope with that contradiction. And then from those individual levels, there are collective levels that follow. Basically, there becomes a distorted or biased collective memory because everyone wants to belittle their own thing and see themselves as victims and push the responsibility to other groups. So there are different dimensions of competitive victimhoods and different functions. So what it does, it's bolstering in-group cohesiveness, it justifies in-group violence, it denies responsibility, avoid negative collective emotions and entitlement for compensation. And it's basically helped to recruit moral and material support from non-involved parties, like you would think the community, the word community, who would think, what would they think about the Hungarians, if they wouldn't try to prove that they are good people. Unfortunately, the tragic thing about it is that this leads to a even like as further you get from the conflict, the more biased the memories become, and the more intense the conflict can become. So this leads to the victim group, of course, feel that, like this group of the Living Memorial group, that this is unjust, that our sorrows and our suffering should be acknowledged. So the conflict is, as you go along with time, it's escalating and it's getting more and more intense. So it also results in the secondary traumatization of the victims. We know that from violence within the family, when violence is not acknowledged, it can lead to secondary traumatization. And it solidifies the conflict into conflict of memory. And it can actually lead to negative attitudes towards the victim group. So, for instance, there is research in Poland. People were asked, they were told about the Kielce pogrom, in which only Polish people participated, and then they were asked about their attitude towards Jews. And then in the other group, in the study, they were told about the similarities of Poles and Jews, and then they were asked about their attitudes. So those who knew about the participation of Poles in the Holocaust had more negative attitudes to Jews than those who were told that Jews and Poles are kind of similar group, and were not reminded to that. So actually, this is a real problem, and this is why you probably and the comparison with Poland is, of course, is not by chance, because it's very similar, the situation there. At the same time, we also have to understand that it's not only one party, it's both parties. So the victims, in case the Jews, they can develop a super trauma. And this could be, for instance, seen in the Never Again slogan, because it could also mean that never again, that we don't want to forget, that we cannot forget about what happened, and that there is some interest to maintain this conflict. Now, what are the possible solutions? Basically, both sides has to make steps, empowering the less powerful victimized group, avoiding the denial of justice, of course, avoiding such memorials and making actual memorial for the Holocaust. And on the other side, accepting the more powerful or the perpetrating group's circumstances. So the Jews can also say that maybe there is some logic and maybe of why and how the Holocaust happened, and maybe there is a possibility to pass by it. Now, more concrete ideas of how to do that is fostering common victimhood identity. So basically saying that we both were victims, but by separating the responsibility from the common suffering, or by knowledge and exchange of common suffering experiences, at the same time maintain dual identity, so there in-group and the common victim of identity, and drawing attention to the cost of a conflict, increasing perceived similarity between groups. This is just what I told you, that, you know, when people were told that, you know, Poles are suffered and Jews are suffered, or Poles and Israelis are similar, they had more empathy towards Jews today. And of course, peace-promoting journalism and intergroup contact, which we know from studies that not all intergroup contacts, but if it's with people who have the same social status, this can be helpful in resolving these conflicts. This can increase a willingness to forgive and reconcile with the outgroup. So basically, once again, the reconciliation is we need to meet the psychological needs of both groups and build mutual trust, a common vision of the future, and create a joint representation of the past, which both parties can agree with. What you see here is the Living Memorial Group in Work. I told you that they were organizing discussions. This is in front of the parliament. This is next to the memorial. This is in a place. So this group is still active. They are organizing these discussions. Yet, you could, and we will have time in the discussion, you could ask if they are able to really mobilize different parties in these discussions, because, you know, what happens also on demonstrations, people come who think the same way. Are they able to also create a dialogue with people who think differently? Thank you so much. This is what I wanted to present today, and now we have a little bit of time of discussions. Yes, yes. So.
Yes. After Admiral Horthy was deposed, how much did Hungarians themselves cooperate with the Germans in the Holocaust?
So this is the interesting thing. He wasn't deposed. So he remained in power until October 1944, when the Hungarian Nazi Party made a coup d'état with the Germans. Oh. So actually, Horthy was in power during the deportations.
Okay. All right. But all right. So he was deposed later. But you mean all the deportations took place during the summer of '44?
All of them.
Okay. Just one other brief question. Are you familiar with a film called The Sunshine?
Yes, yes.
What do you think of that?
I really like that movie. I love István Szabó and other movies of him. Sunshine is a movie I really recommend it to all of you. It's a little long, because it does what I do, but it starts even earlier, and then you can see on the example of one family how, you know, from this Austro-Hungarian Empire comes, you know, the interwar years and 4 generations. It's amazing. So I definitely think it's a really, really great.
Historically pretty sophisticated.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know if I heard you right, but did you say that Jews in Budapest were not deported?
Yes, so basically, going back to the historical part, so what happened was that deportation started in May. Just in 3 months, all the people were deported. But there was a lot of international pressure at the time. People knew what was going on in Auschwitz. And Horthy was also pressured to stop the deportations, so he did so. So deportations were stopped in the end of the summer, and the Budapest Jews just didn't come before that. So basically, they were the last. They were the only group that was not deported. Yet at the same time, they were already forced to live in something that's called sporadic ghetto. So they were forced to live in yellow star houses. And also women already at the time had to go to forced labor. Also some of them were just rounded up and taken, especially after this coup d'état in October, which happened, you know, just in 2 months. Because Horthy did want to leave the alliance. This was why the coup d'état started, but you know, he was already at the time was not able to. And that's when the Hungarian Nazis, together with the German Nazis, wanted to go to the end with the deportations and including the Jews in Budapest. So they started to just round up people and send them on death march. So it's not exactly true that it didn't happen with the Budapest Jews, but many of the Budapest Jews survived in the Budapest ghetto, which was liberated by the Soviets in January 1945. So in this, yeah. Thank you.
One of the things you said was to recognize the victimization of all of them. But on the other hand, don't they have to recognize the separateness too? And that, I don't think, has begun yet. In most of the countries, the fact of that we were separate victims. And still are, and it's never recognized.
Yeah. Yeah, it's separate, but at the same time, I think this is what the theory is trying to say, that if you have a trauma, and for the Hungarians, Trianon is a trauma, it's really hard to, and also a lot of people, I'm sure they, like lost their family in the war, either soldiers or, so everyone has some kind of a traumatic experience from this time, so then it's really hard to know how to measure one to the other. We were separate, yes. We lost. Why were Jews separate? Because they were deprived of their basic rights. That's why all Holocaust education and this global memory of the Holocaust is so connected with the human rights. And that's why actually, even though during the communist time there was this fascist and anti-fascist narrative, people did have a moral understanding of fascists were bad. This is not the case now, because now what happens, it's the whitewashing of this interwar era, because this was also the time when Hungary was independent for the first time as Hungary. And Hitler did help Hungary regain some of those territories until he was so there is this kind of like attempt to restore that time.
But I think the rise in anti-Semitism in Europe is due to appease their guilt, that they were not responsible in every one of the countries. It's all over, even in Scandinavia now.
Yeah, and this is what this global and local memory of the Holocaust is trying to say. So in the global memory of the Holocaust, you identify with the victims, Schindler's List, and that's okay. Everyone can identify with that there were children and people, innocent people killed, and that's something bad, and that shouldn't happen again. But can you identify with your own families participating in that? That would be the local memory. So that's why both is needed, and each place has to go through these stages, like to face that difficult past.
But
yeah.
You have to face it and then get past it and do something to make up for it, which hasn't been done.
Has to work on both sides, though.
Yes.
Was there a Jewish aspect, if any, to the Hungarian Revolution of 1956?
Of course, there was. So, first of all, what was happening that in 56 there was anti-Semitism that reappeared. Why? Because there are different reasons. One is that already, like I know from my grandmother who said when she came back to her village, what her neighbor said that, we also suffered a lot during the war. So there was already, this narrative was already there. So there were pogroms. There were pogroms directly after the war in Hungary, and there were pogroms in 56, not like in Poland, but there were some Jews who were killed in 56 also. And a lot of Jews left Hungary after the revolution because they knew that there was something that could happen, but it was actually control. But there were tens of thousands of Jews who left Hungary in '56. So that's another Jewish component of it. The other Jewish component is a more difficult one, is that, you know, many of the communist leaders in the 50s, including Rákosi, who was the leader of the Communist Party, he was Jewish. He wasn't an observant Jew, but he had Jewish lineage. So that's a more complicated aspect of '56 and communism. How is it related with Jews? If it is, if it is related in the terms of the Hungarian narrative, it's in that way. Yeah.
Two things. One, I'm a child of Hungarian survivors, and I have many friends. I grew up in New York. I think the big hurdle to overcome is this notion of equivalency, that Austria says we were victimized, and now the Poles say. And if you look at some of the facts, Jewish people suffered much more, to be honest, than people who still had their lives to live under communist era, which was difficult. But the horrendous events of the Holocaust are just, there's no equivalency, in my mind, and to many of my friends' minds. There's no equivalency. That's the hard thing to overcome, to me, is to say, well, we suffered as much as you did, then that's a boundary that's very hard to pass. But I would just like to ask, I'm trying to understand what's going on now in Hungary with Orban. I believe there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism, and I believe it's very difficult. Could you share with us a little of what is the life like now in Hungary with Orban?
Yeah.
I get very positive news about what's going on.
It's interesting. I don't agree with people who stress the increase of anti-Semitism. Actually, there are studies recently that were done which show that anti-Semitism decreased, but Jews or people perceive as if it would have grown. So actually, especially in Hungary, anti-Semitism did not increase. It's different from in France. I think you mentioned France or something, and other Western European countries where you have massive Muslim immigration. In Hungary, there is no such a thing. So there are no visible Jews either. So the 150,000 Jews are mostly assimilated, and even, they don't really... So Jews are not visible. So in that sense, anti-Semitism is, I don't think that's the main problem, but the main problem is exactly this missing of, this human rights narrative, what that means. Because what happened is that right now people are on the streets, my friends, are in Budapest on the street protesting because basically what happened is that Orban has a complete dictatorship. So with the media in his hand, with the court system now, parallel court system. So that's what makes the memory of the Holocaust also not understandable. Because if you understand the basic human rights and accept that, you will understand how it's different to be Jewish when there are anti-Jewish laws and non-Jewish, and then. So in that sense, it's an indirect attack on Jews, because again, no totalitarian system was ever good for any minority, including the Jews. But there is really strange politics around it, because there is the Federation that I mentioned to you, the Alliance of Hungarian Jewish Communities, and most Hungarian Jews, let's say 99%, according to the last studies, are left-wing or liberal. But recently, in the past 5 years, Chabad, which is an Orthodox Jewish group, started to represent a more conservative Jewish politics. And they are allying with the government, and they got a lot of support from the government. So even though they don't really represent Hungarian Jewry, they are there as the core Jew now, and they got a lot of funding to fight anti-Semitism, which I don't think really is a problem, but then they blame the liberal Jews who work in the newspapers to be anti-Semitic because they report critically about Israel. So it's like, now it's really, unfortunately, became like a politicized, of course, issue. But I think the main problem in Hungary is the loss of the democratic system by now, and also the Roma population, who are the new other. They are the visible new other. They live in poverty, and there were hate crimes against them. So that's.
I can't think of one exception to the rule about totalitarian, let's say, leaders being bad to the Jews, and that is Francisco Franco. During the Spanish Civil War, he actually, despite pressure from Hitler, he did permit 20,000 to 35,000 Jews who were fleeing the Holocaust, let's say, safe passage through Spain on their way to Portugal. And he actually had the Spanish embassy in Hungary just, they gave refuge. So I think, depending on which source you use, I saw one source said 5,200 Jews. That's, I think, important to remember.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Two kind of questions.
Yes.
The Jews who, the 150 or so thousand, aside from the Chabad introduction, do they practice at all? Are there Reform or conservative synagogues? I mean, do they go on the holidays? And my other question was, could you talk about your family a little bit?
Yeah.
About your background? With your grandmother that she came back?
Yeah. So the 150,000 Jews, they are not very much observant. Of course, also because during the communist times, being Jewish was not something that you could easily do. And most of the people who left in 56 were the observant and traditional Jews. So, for instance, in my family, to connect it to that, my family is not a typical one because we don't come from Budapest. Because of the history, most of the 150,000 are Budapest Jews, because Jews from the countryside were deported. But my mother said that they had Purim and other holidays in Salgótarján. This is the town when I was born and where she was coming from, until 56. But because the people who were doing it, more actively, they left in 56. So after that, it was even more harder to keep, the traditions. So because of that, and because, of course, the Budapest Jewry, Jews who live in cities are, more quickly secularizing. So because of that as well, and Budapest Jewry was more secularizing already on the turn of the century. So I would say there is a lot of high holiday Jews. So there is the great synagogue in Budapest. You probably have seen it, the Dohány Synagogue, which is the largest in Europe, which is filled on Yom Kippur. But that's the only day when it's filled, and 3,000 people come. And other, like the younger generation, both the second and the third generation, like my generation, and there are different groups. There is the main stream in Hungary is represented by this group, the Alliance of Hungarian Jewish Communities, which is a neologue, which is like conservative. And there are a few Reform and a few Orthodox groups, and there are a lot of like social culture groups as well, like Marom, where I've been active, which was organizing programs for young people. So my story, just maybe one more detail. So my grandmother survived the Holocaust because she was in Budapest at the time. She was studying to become a dressmaker. So that's how she could survive. It was easier also in Budapest. It's a bigger city. You could come and go, hide more easily, while, in the countryside, everyone knew who the Jews were. But all of her family was killed who were at the countryside in Kaba, and my grandfather, he survived in the forced labor camp in the southern part of Hungary, because it was possible to survive forced labor. So most men were in forced labor, while the ghettos were for women and children who were not in forced labor. So that's how they survived. Yes, definitely, and then in the 50s, actually, the leaders of the Jewish community were accused of killing Karl Wallenberg in Hungary. So yeah, but he went. We never know where he died. Yeah, we have 5 more minutes and one last question, and then thank you.
So,
2 questions. Okay.
I like the way you did the us and them has been used for many things, but the way of looking at the victims, I think, is a good framework for us. But I have kind of 2 thoughts and questions around those. So the global Holocaust, memorialization and what's going on now, I see some trends in that could be good, it could be disturbing, in that now the stories are more about rescue and this, everyone was a victim. And I was even thinking about the book Thief, the book Thief, which tells, kind of those stories are true, but they're not always the mainstream. So it's how to keep the proper place of what happened in the Holocaust and human rights and Jewish people going forward with many generations more assimilation worldwide. And then the second.
Can I react on that? So I understand. Yeah, I understand that, and I agree with you. I share that. For instance, anxiety about if we are going to just focus on the people who saved Jews, we're gonna miss an important part of the story. At the same time, again, there are studies that show that, and this is the background of it, this psychology, that that it can have negative effects. So like in Germany, for instance, what happened? They worked through the human rights issues, and then if you work through the local issues, then you can connect to the global memory. So today, most Germans also think that their family was part of those who helped Jews. But at the same time, they have a political system where they don't question the basic human rights. At the same time, yeah, so this is important in order to pass through, because if we're gonna just stress to focus on the perpetrators and what was your role and why did you do this to me, we're gonna maintain the conflict.
Yeah, and then the second thought that I had was that, and I'm an educator, so it's, I could teach these issues. So one concept that I found leads nowhere is like, who is the biggest victim in history? Because anyone who's lost 1 to 1,000 to 1,000,000 of their people feels that victimization. So it's, you have to recognize other victimizations and then still tell the story. It's a very big challenge, as we can see by how this monument came out in Budapest. But, it's also can be treacherous ground. I remember having a speaker on the Holocaust speaking to a very diverse group of students, and she had left Nuremberg, but she made the statement that the Holocaust was much worse than slavery. And I just saw their faces, because she was thinking because a slave had value in their lives, and the whole goal of Hitler was to destroy every Jewish person, but she just lost most of the group then. So it's the same thing, if you're Hungarian and, your family was killed because they were anti-fascist. So it's so difficult, and I just commend your organization for doing all that they can. But, it's a big, I don't know if you have any thoughts on how to go forward and not try to, I don't know, maybe we have to just be careful of, we are the biggest victims ever in history in this century, but I don't know what, going forward, it's like, where do we go?
Okay, very quickly, because we are really over time.
Very quickly, you never finished the story of your grandmother. What happened to her?
So she was in Budapest, and she was hiding in Budapest. She was held by the illegal communist movement, where her cousin was involved. She was in the ghetto, but because she knew how to sue, she was able to take down the Yellow Star and also leave the ghetto, and then she was hiding in different places, and then that's how and she survived in Budapest. So.
And how did you come about?
So then my grandmother and my grandfather met after the war. They married, and then my mother was born, and then a few years later, I also was born in 1980.
So you were born in Hungary?
I was born in Hungary, 1980, and I just came to New York because of NYU in 2013. But before that, from the early 2000s, I've been involved in recreating Jewish culture in Hungary, mostly through programs for young people, social justice, religious programs, and this is how I came about to speak here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.